Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to view House of Darkness. So, really, I gotta say that this movie doesn't really reveal to you what it is until like the last couple of minutes of the film. And then by then, in all honesty, I didn't really care at that point. Even though I liked the cast, the cast list can only make me like this movie so far. To really just have seemingly 95% of this movie have so much meaningless dialogue that just kind of they backpedal and they just go, wait a minute, you didn't go on and answer my question. There's a lot of that. Or, oh wait, hey, you didn't go on and do the one thing that you said that you were going to do, so come on, do it now. And then it's like, yeah, I don't know, maybe. And I'm just like, really? Okay, sure, just whatever you want to do for this film. Um, I just kind of left just disappointed about this film. Honestly, out of the gate, when someone is to go on and immediately say what their name is, I figured out exactly what this movie was. Then I was like, oh yeah, this is this kind of movie. Oh, okay, all right, well. Because the more that I went through this film, and I was like, okay, this feels like this kind of movie. And then immediately once the girl said what her name was, I was like, oh, so this is this movie. Okay, all right. I wish that we could have gone on and done something more eventful in this film, but we just never really got there. It's just one long night of a character just having dialogue with people until they finally reveal by the end of the film, oh, okay, this is why we're here. So, with that said, I would have to go on and just immediately say that this movie is bad. I've probably seen worse movies, but there's a whole dream sequence in this movie that I'm like, what the heck was that? And then they have to explain the dream sequence by the end of the film, and by then I'm like, I could care less. Man, this movie, because I was just left so just disappointed. I'm like, I wish this could have gone somewhere, but it didn't. Even the dialogue didn't really go anywhere. So much backpedaling and so much time where they were just like, oh no, yeah, say the thing that you were going to say before. You said that you were going to do this, do it. And the person's like, yeah, and it's like, okay, great. It's this kind of movie. So let's go on and let's tee this up. I honestly am going to try as much as possible to not reveal what the actual punchline of the movie all is technically. But you could probably easily figure it out if you've seen these kind of movies before, because there's been a lot of them. So with that said, we have Hap, who is played by Justin Long, who ends up bringing Kate Bosworth's character to her place late at night, and this place ends up being a castle, and we go on and think that Hap is going to bed this woman and get everything that he's ever dreamed of, and come to find out, all of a sudden, when it gets close to a possible moment where both Hap and Kate Bosworth's character is to get close or tease us with a passionate love-making moment, all of a sudden we end up having a character being introduced. As we've also kind of had some uneasy moments, some uneasy sounds, or some characters that are to be in the distance to make us think like, oh no, like something's gonna happen, something's gonna appear, something's gonna scare us, but it just makes us uneasy. And even that, like, we don't really get a legitimate jump scare until possibly the end of the film. So once we introduce this other character, then we, of course, are to kind of transition to have Hap go on with this other character so they can have dialogue and they can talk more. And then by the end of this film, there is to be this ghost story to be told that ends up tying in another character that by the end of this film is to tell us what this whole movie is about, and then is to end with me, of course, going on and be like going, like, okay, all right, that was a movie to watch. So with that said, it's about that time to just really go into spoilers. Like this, the grading of this movie, if I haven't said already, it's a bad film, but I'm like I wish there just would have been something more here, or just something here. That I didn't have to wait to the very tail end of the movie to be interested by. So with that said, where can you go on and see this movie right now? Well, of course, there is a number of apps besides going on to a $6.99 premium access fee for this movie. I will go on and recommend a app called Box UHD, which I hope is still possibly available on a Google Play Store. If not, then you could also go on to another app called Yes Movies, which I believe is hopefully currently available on a Play Store. Or if not, you can also go on to 123 Movies, and not quite sure how much they have really premium access there, but maybe this movie might be available on that app soon. Hopefully you gotta just kind of go on and find the right version of this app, and at some point it'll work. Excuse me. So, with that said, let's go on into spoilers, because really, for what I have to say, and spoilers, really, like, there's really, like, I gotta save all that for spoilers, so let's get into it. So, Devil fire this bad boy up, because it's about that time. Just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time to get spoiled this movie. So we have Hap, who is to deliver Kate Bosworth's character, who is Mina, and there's a whole reason why I didn't go on to say what Kate Bosworth's character's name was, because it kind of ruins the whole movie. I was like, oh, Mina, all right, yeah, like, I've seen quite a bit of certain shows or movies lately that I'm like, oh yeah, like, of course, so this is this kind of film. But so, Hap goes on with Mina after they seem to have had quite a few beers at this bar, and we have them stroll their way to this castle, and we have Hap like, wow, like, this is a beautiful place. And Mina's like, oh yeah, like, it's just like one of the many like different estates that my family has because we're rich. And Hap's like, wow, like I guess I hit the jackpot with this girl. Like, hopefully, like, me and her work out, because she's rich and like, she's amazing and this and that. So we have Hap and Mina who go into this room together, and all of a sudden Hap is to see this person in this other room. Then come to find out, once they turn the lights on, he just realizes, oh, it's just a mirror. I was talking to a mirror. Oh, how stupid was I? And I was like, okay, because he ended up seeing like a woman in the mirror, but like Hap's character was saying like, "Excuse me," and then he sees his own reflection, and he's like, "Oh, okay." So, but there was also certain times where there was like sounds going into the house, and so Hap was like, "You sure that we're alone? Because like this house is making some noises." And Mina's just like, "Oh no, it's fine, whatever." Like it feels like she doesn't even know if like they're by themselves, as if this is some possible ghost thing that's going on in this house. Like there's a paranormal event that's gonna kick off. So they made it think like this movie was like a ghost film, but we end up finding out different by the end of the film. So we have Hap that is to go on and tell Mina that he's an honest, good guy, and like, yeah, maybe he fibs or bends the truth a little, but like he seems like a good guy. And so Mina's like, oh, okay, all right, like that's nice. So we have Mina that comes off as like feisty or this tease, and like the more and more that they start to talk, the more there's like an innuendo kind of talk going on between them. And so when all of a sudden Mina is to leave to go and get drinks, we all of a sudden have Hap's character, Long's character, that is to get this phone call from his friend, and so he answers it. And so we have Hap that's going on and saying, well, yeah, uh, man, I bet you're like you're really gonna regret not being with this girl and landing this girl. Like I'm gonna go on and get lucky with this girl tonight, and you're just gonna be stuck at the bar. Ha 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 ha. Yeah, I'm sure you're gonna be so happy that you ended up scoring this woman. And he's like, yeah, and I'm in this beautiful castle, and it's amazing. Blah 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 blah. And so like Hap is like, yeah, I'm definitely gonna get lucky tonight. Uh, I'm gonna bed this woman, and so on and so forth. And like I'll send you pictures later. Ha 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 ha. So after we have Mina that finally comes back, she ends up asking Hap, uh, like who he was talking to, because she heard a conversation that he was having, and he's like, "Oh, I just answered some text from my friend." And she's like, "Well, it didn't really seem like you were just texting somebody. Like it seems like you were talking to somebody." And so then Hap, and at some point they both exchanged names because they didn't even know who one another's name was. Like they knew nothing about one another. And so we had Hap that is to go on and say, it's like, well, yeah, I went on and I was talking to my friend because he was kind of worried about me, and I told him that I went with you and this and that. But more and more when Mina starts to like, well, but like, didn't you kind of say some other things, you know? And Hap just goes on like, oh no, 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 no. And so it's like, aha. So immediately when this guy is to say, oh yeah, I'm an honest guy, and then you turn around and you have this guy who is lying again to this woman. So Mina just lets it slide. She's like, ah, okay, all right. So we have at some point where we have the two ask one another if they are to be married, because Mina's like, was this just some other woman that you were kind of calling? And Hap's like, no, 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 that was just my friend. And so Mina's like, well, like, but are you married? And so Hap is just like, well, no. And Mina's like, well, and so Hap goes on, he's like, well, like, I have a legal separation with a woman. Like it's all like lawyered up and everything, and so like I'm separated from a woman right now. Hence why I went to the bar with my friend. Da 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 da. And so Hap ends up going on and asking Mina, like, if she's married or if she's with somebody. And Mina never answers him. Even when he continues to ask her, it's like, well, hey, wait. You never answered my question. And Mina never does. So, anyways, so, but if anything, I think the real concentration that Hap has with Mina is like the estates that they have and that she's rich, and that's all he really hangs on. So we have at some point where our characters are starting to get hot and heavy, and they end up start kissing, and all of a sudden we have a moment where Mina is to really bite down on Hap's uh, lip, to where all of a sudden it starts to bleed. And so all of a sudden Mina doesn't stop there. She continues to just kind of kiss Pat's lips, and it's like, well, like anybody else would probably be just really uncomfortable about like the whole like me like the broken lip thing, but I guess you're fine about it. Like, yeah, of course she is, because I immediately knew who this character was, and I was like, yeah, I don't think she's gonna be uh like running away from a sign of blood. So, or blood. So, uh, all of a sudden, while things are getting more hot and heavy, we then have a moment where Hap is to have Mina start like unbuttoning his pants and start feeling around, and that's when all of a sudden Lucy just comes in and is to C block everything that's going on. How horrible! Lucy should just go on and ruin this moment, because uh, why not? And so uh, we of course immediately have Hap's character who ends up putting back on his pants. He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry that you had to see that. Like, I'm that like this was really awkward. I didn't know someone else was here. Like, are you her sister, or her roommate, or friend, whoever you are? I don't know." So Mina ends up introducing her sister Lucy, and it's like, oh, okay, all right. So all of a sudden, it seems that we find out that Lucy is a lot more honest than Mina is, and but again, she ends up having some feistiness to her too. So we go on, and we have Pat, who continues to drink. Oh, we also, when Mina was to find out Hap's name, and it ends up like standing for something, and he's like, oh yeah, it stands for happy, and he's like, oh no, it stands for like Hapgood or something like that, or Hapgund, or something like that. It doesn't say in IMDb. Isn't that great? So Mina is to mention that even though like Hap thinks that this isn't a very uncommon name, Mina's like, "Oh no, I've heard of that name in my time," and it's like, "Yeah, I'm sure you have." Any unique name that sounds like ancient, yeah, I'm sure you've heard this name before. So, but Hap was to, of course, start going on and start talking to Lucy, and Mina is ending up going off to go and get drinks. Uh, we start to have Hap's character who's like, man, like, I'm getting very hammered. And he ends up telling his friend that when he was calling him. And so, like, we start to realize that more than likely this alcohol is probably being drugged. So, to the point of we get Hap who's like sitting on this couch and he ends up dozing off to the point of him falling asleep. And all of a sudden, he wakes up in this cave like area, tied to this chair, rope tied to this chair. And so he ends up like calling for Mina or anybody. He's like, what the fuck? Like, so he's tied to this chair, And so Hap ends up kind of knocking over the chair, and then figures out a way to like loosen one of his hands, and then is to get himself out of this chair and is to just start walking around. He ends up seeing a girl in the distance, but then she ends up disappearing. And so Hap is just like, well, okay, all right, whatever that was. So Hap goes on to see that there's this like hole with this kind of like incline of a hill. And so we have Hap's character that tries to like run up this like inclined hill to see if he can make it out of this hole, but he ends up falling backwards, and he ends up continuing to tumble and whatever, to the point of him breaking his leg. And so now Hap is to be stuck in this cave, and he's yelling out for anyone to help him as his leg is broken. Cue him back in the mansion. Where all of a sudden he has to wake up from whatever this dream was, and he's like, oh, yeah, oh, I'm sorry. Like, man, you know what? Like, I am so drunk, and I'm so tired. Like, I've never been I'm sorry. And so, we have Hap, who is continuing to talk to Lucy, because Mina is still gone. So, Hap ends up saying, like, hey, like, since this house is so big, how about you just kind of kill time? You give me a private tour. Give me a tour of this place, why not? Because, of course, Lucy is to ask Hap if Mina gave him a tour, and he's like, oh, no, like, so, like, let's go on and, like, just, like, let's go through this place and just kind of check things out. So, Lucy starts to take, of course, Hap on this tour, and at some point we have Hap who's just like, man, like, whew, like, man, this seems to like be a castle that goes on forever. Like, I'm getting very winded, and like it must have been from all the booze, because I like we start to have really just Hap here who's to kind of bite off more than he can chew, so on and so forth. So we have Hap making his way to this kind of balcony-like location with a kind of to see out onto the house. And so Hap continues to talk to Lucy, and it seems that the thing between both Mina and Lucy is they used to tell ghost stories. And Hap is like, ghost story? Like, okay, like, all right, like, do you have one? And Lucy's just like, well, no. And like Hap is like, well, you made a whole big deal about you talking about this ghost story. Like, you have to have like one of them. And Lucy's like, well, I have to probably tell you one, because all the other ones I've already told Mina. And he's like, well, go ahead. Like, before like Mina comes back, like, just tell me a story. And so by the time that Lucy starts to say the story, Mina ends up walking in, and Mina ends up starting to give everybody booze again. And so I'm just like, yeah, of course. Just ruin the story. So they decide to, all three of them, go into this other room where finally they're going to get to this ghost story. But the whole thing is, you have to give one to get one. So Hap is to now be forced to tell a ghost story, and Hap is like, you know what, like, I'm not a storyteller. Like, I don't think I can go on and come up with something. And Mina's like, well, hey, you said before that you were a fibber, so, like, isn't that what a story is? Just fibs and lies and whatever? And so Hap is just like, well, like, okay, like, all right. So Hap's story ends up being the exact same story of where we've kind of been so far leading up to this point, because Hap is to basically say it's like, well, like, yeah, like I was to go to a bar, or some guy named Steve was to go to this bar, and he ends up going on and meeting this girl, and they end up going back to this castle, and then at some point they go on and meet this girl's sister, and they have at some point where they all just uh, like kind of F one another, and that's the story. And they're like, seriously, that's it? Like, that's the story? Like, that's not really a ghost story. And so Hap just goes on, and it's just like, well, okay, they all effed one another, and then all of a sudden there was this ghost, and that's it. Like, so on and so forth. Like, this kind of very just rushed ghost story. But then he wants to hear the ghost story from Lucy. And so Lucy's like, okay, since you, like, took so much effort into your ghost story. So Lucy is to have this story about some girl who ends up finding a bunch of men who all end up taking advantage of her. And so Hap is to go on like, oh, like really, like that's the story, and it's like, and so all of a sudden the girl ends up finding her family, and they end up nursing her back to health, like muscle by muscle, drip by drip. And Hap's like, what does a drip mean? What's dripping? So, and so Lucy is to mention that, yeah, like, her family with her 3 sisters are to go off and find these guys and kill them off. And that's what they seem to have gone on and done for a number of years. So, in other words, whoever these characters are have gone on and just find some, like, bad seed kind of guys, and, like, if it doesn't seem like they're knights in shining armors, they just kill them off. And so, like once you start to see guys, and you start to see them unravel, and it's like, oh, this looks like this guy is to be a knight. No, not so much. Like, once you start to find out, like, oh yeah, like, he lied about this, or like he's already covering up about that, then all of a sudden it starts to become more and more that it's like, I don't know how many chances we could have given this guy. So they end up talking about the 3 sisters, and so Hap is like, well, luckily there's only 2 of you, right? Ha 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 ha. All of a sudden we end up having the 3rd sister, Nora, who jump scares Hap. And he's like, wow, all right. Like, you got me, good one. So come to find out there's 3 sisters. And so Hap is just like, okay, so what's, like, going on here? And, like, Nora is like, he hasn't figured it out yet. Like, we just told him this story, and he hasn't figured it out. And so Hap is just like, well, like, what are we really gonna go on and do here? Like, it feels like I've, like, wasted my whole entire night. And it's like, well, think about the 88 minutes or 80 some odd minutes people have waited through this film, and to figure out what this story is really about by the end of it. But so we have Hap that's going on, like, if he doesn't get, like, effed, like, I guess, like, he is to realize that these women are just teases, and he's just like, well, like, you know what, I'm gonna get out of here. Like, you know what, if I'm not gonna get what I thought I was gonna get out of this night, then, like, I'm leaving. And so Hap tries to leave, and come to find out, like, the door won't open, and then he goes back to the girls, and he's just like, after the insults and everything, and he's just like, hey, open up this door. And they're like, well, like, it seems that you really have to like put some like it gets stuck, so you really gotta like try to really get it open, figure out a way to get it open. And so by the time Hap gets back to the door ends up opening itself, and he's like, "Oh, okay, all right, what the what the heck?" So, but by then, like, we have to just tell you what the real story of this all is. So we have these women that once this door open, we have Mina that appears in front of Hap and bites into his neck, and Hap walks his way back into the room. And so the women are to mention, it's like, well, hey, Hap, like, I'll give you a heads up, like, or I'll give you like I'll give you a moment to run if you can try. But Hap is to just kind of drag himself, and there's nowhere where he can go. So the women surround him and start to tear parts of his body open to drain the blood off of him. And so I was like, is this a vampire movie or is it not? Like, to me, like, you can draw the conclusion that, like, I guess it is a vampire movie. Even though, like, to me, I'm like, they're really chomping and pulling away at this guy's skin. So how is it like a vampire film? But I guess it has to be the closest thing to it because Mina and like the attachment that I made was like, okay, Dracula had three women, and one of them was named Mina. And so I was like, oh, okay, so this is just another Dracula kind of story. Like it was like a Dracula adjacent kind of story where you focus on the three women that had at some point when they were to be rejected by the world, they went on to become vampires and become this family where they vengefully went after the men and tore them apart easily. And so maybe the whole story of this was they were going after every single descendant of that one family from the past and found like and tracked them all down to wipe them all out. Uh, Hence why we had Mina that was going on and saying like, "Oh yeah, I've seen quite a few haps in my day," realizing that yeah, she had hunted down every bit of this family tree to kill them all off in one way or the other. So yeah, even though you would probably go on and have people probably piece together or figure it out, uh, that at some point their whole family line is getting hunted down, but I guess not. But with that said, I'm just going to go on and call that a review. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything that I misplaced or forgot about, because I'm sure there's quite a bit of dialogue that I didn't really completely go through this movie. Um, Kind of leave it to whoever wants to go on and check this out when at some point it'll probably get put onto some streaming service somewhere after X number of months, days, whatever. But with that said, I'm going to go on and get the heck out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.